Removing mold lines in flash and filling seams. There's a certain amount of cleanup that you need to do on your parts before you can assemble a model. Each one of these sprues that comes in your kit is molded in a two-piece mold. In other words, there are two big pieces of steel that go together that are injected with plastic, and when the plastic is cool, they pop the mold apart and your part sprue comes out. Now that leaves a mold line or a parting line where the mold halves meet. What you need to do is find that parting line on your parts and clean them off. Let's take a look at the tools we'll need to remove the mold lines or parting lines on the pieces in our kit. There are two types of tools that we'll use. The first being a scraping tool. The scraper can be something as simple as a hobby knife. We just need a nice sharp edge that we can drag along the surface and remove the mold line. The second tool would be sanding materials. There are a lot of different sanding materials, the primaries being traditional sandpaper plus foam back sanding material. This is handy for going into curved surfaces and hard to reach areas. There is also emery boards, sanding sticks, sanding strips, and sanding boards. My favorite sandpaper and foam are from Tamiya. It's also handy to have a surface plate. A surface plate is a hard surface with sandpaper mounted on it. This is basically a piece of steel. You can use a piece of tile, glass, or any other smooth surface. Just attach sandpaper to it with double stick tape. This can be really useful to sand large surfaces easily. Sandpaper, scraping tools, clean off mold lines. Sometimes in the molding process, you end up with something called flash. This is extra plastic that escapes from the two mold halves. Sometimes it's due to mold pressure, sometimes the age of the tooling. If you look closely at my parts, you'll notice this one is very clean, but the other has mold flash on it. I'm going to use my knife to clean that flash off, then clean it up with a little sanding. Sometimes with smaller parts, you get flash and mold lines. This railing has flash on the top and bottom, as well as mold lines that need to be cleaned up. Sometimes you need to fill seam lines on a model. This is the Jupiter Sea Rocket. Where the two main halves of the body meet, no matter how good a job you do gluing it together and cleaning it up, you may end up with a seam line, which is an indented line where the parts meet. It is different than a mold line. A mold line is a raised line that is scraped off, whereas a seam line is an indent that's filled with putty and sanded smooth. We'll use Deluxe Materials Perfect Plastic Putty and apply it with AK Interactive silicone brushes. We're ready to fill our seam line. We'll take some Perfect Plastic Putty, open it up, and squeeze out a small amount. When you're finished, make sure to cap it up tight so that it doesn't dry out. Next, we'll take a silicone brush with a square chisel tip. Silicone brushes are excellent for applying putty since nothing sticks to silicone. We'll apply the putty to the seam line across the seam. Avoid applying parallel to the line. This way the putty fills the gaps. When the putty is dry, I'll grab some sanding material. This is where the sanding foam comes in handy since it is a curved surface. Be careful when sanding though, not to remove raised detail. There you have it, a finished seam line.